We are going to talk about a huge group of creatures that most of us don't have a lot of contact with, except on various unusual occasions. And these creatures are known as the invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone. They have other means to support their bodies, which we will discuss in some respect. And they're separated from another group of animals which have backbones, which are known as vertebrates. Now, as you know, we all have backbones, and so we are a part of that group of individuals or creatures that are known as vertebrates, along with horses and dogs and fish and birds, etc. But we are going to be talking about this enormous group known as the invertebrate. One thing that we have to introduce is the concept of symmetry, and there is actually a lot of different ideas about symmetry, and it's important to understand this concept because it helps you classify these various organisms. Symmetry can be divided into three different parts, one of which is known as spherical symmetry. And spherical symmetry is when an organism can be cut into two identical halves with any cut that moves through the center of the creature. Now, neither of these creatures have spherical symmetry. Spherical symmetry is actually extremely rare because it's any cut through the center. What is more common is something known as radial symmetry. Radial symmetry is when an organism can be cut into two identical halves with a longitudinal cut through the center. And the starfish on the left here has radial symmetry. So you can make a longitudinal cut this way, and you have two identical halves. You can make a longitudinal cut this way. You don't have two identical halves in that regard. But there are certain cuts that you can make longitudinally that give you radial symmetry. The third is bilateral symmetry, and actually that starfish does not have radial symmetry. It has bilateral symmetry like the crab on the other side there. Bilateral symmetry is an organism that can be cut into two identical halves, but only with one longitudinal cut through the center. So as I said, if you cut this starfish through this point, or if you cut this crab through this point, you have two identical halves. So both of these organisms actually have bilateral symmetry. Now, if the starfish had 6 arms instead of 5, then it would have radial symmetry. So let's move on to probably one of the most simple animals in the animal kingdom, simple group of animals known as Porifera. And these are macroscopic animals, not bacteria. And Porifera also are known as sponges. Now, Porifera have what's known as an epidermis, as you can see on this diagram. The epidermis is the outer layer of cells that are designed to protect the organism. Underneath the epidermis is a jelly-like substance that separates the epidermis from the inner aspects of the sponge, and this jelly-like substance is called the mesenchyme. Now, as you can see here, the sponge basically takes water in through its body, and then it goes out through something called the osculum. And this circulation of water allows it both to eat and to take in oxygen as it circulates. It's held down on wherever it's planted by something known as a holdfast. And so you have this constant flow of water from here, from the sides, through the walls and out. And that's how the organism eats. And this just shows the same thing. It shows you the channels which water moves through. Water comes in this way and moves out through the central canal. And you also have what's known as spicules. Now the spicules are these glass-like supporting structures within the wall of the sponge that gives it some degree of support. And this is found in what's known as the mesenchyme. This is the mesenchyme, or the jelly-like substance right here. And on the inside, you can also find something called spongin. It's a protein that, if there are no spicules in a certain area, this protein, which is a tough sort of gelatinous protein, will also serve to support the sponge in lieu of the presence of spicules if spicules are not present. Now this diagram also shows these collar cells on the inside. Now here's the epidermis out here, and the mesenchyme, and then the collar cells are on the inside. And these collar cells have these flagella, and they help circulate the fluid, water, through the sponge. As it comes into the sponge, they circulate it into the central cavity and then out the osculum. Now, the cells that are also, let me go back to this last picture. You see these amoeboid cells that are in the mesenchyme. These amoeboid cells are mentioned again here. They're called amoebocytes because they use pseudopods to perform their functions, and their functions include circulating materials and also eliminating waste and taking in food. A gemmule, and this whole thing here is a gemmule. A gemmule is a cluster of cells that are encased in this hard spiculated material. This is reinforced by an outer shell, and this allows this to survive hostile environments. And this is one of the ways in which the sponge reproduces. Sponges always live in the water, and they are one of the most simple animals on the planet. They're not plants. It's important that you understand. A lot of people think that sponges are plants. They are not plants, and it's important to remember that. Now, moving up the complexity ladder from sponges, we come to the phylum Cnidaria. And Cnidaria, you may recognize Cnidaria. You may have actually run into Cnidaria before. Cnidaria are the jellyfish, and this on this side is the medusa form of a species of Cnidaria, and this floating in the water is something we would see as a jellyfish. So there are two forms that every Cnidaria has: the polyp form and the medusa form. The polyp form is a tubular form that is sessile. It's planted on the ground, on the bottom of the ocean or the bottom of the body of water you find it in. It has a mouth. It's planted down here, and it has a mouth here. It takes in material into its mouth, food into its mouth. Here are the tentacles around the mouth that tend to channel things into the mouth. And at the other end is a basal disc that forms its attachment wherever it's attached. And it can reproduce, as it's shown here, by budding. It also has reproductive tissue for reproduction. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. Now the other form is the medusa form, and the medusa form is not sessile. It's a free swimming form. Both of these are the same species. And this is another situation of alternation of generations, where one generation is this form, and then the next generation is the polyp form, and then the next generation is the medusa form. It's a free swimming. This is faced upward with the mouth facing upward. This is always facing downward with the mouth facing downward, the tentacles facing downward, You see the tentacles are facing upward here. And the body is commonly bell-shaped like this. Now the Cnidaria doesn't have any distinction between its mouth and its anus. They're both the same hole here, in the polyp form and in the medusa form. And what you can see here is it has an epithelium as well that goes around the outside of both of these forms. This blue is the epidermis. On this form is over here. On this form it's here. The epidermis again serves to be the interface between the free surface. Frequently it functions in terms of protection against the environment that it's in. The middle layer here, all this material in here on the medusa form and all this material here on the polyp form is called mesoglea. Mesoglea is a jelly-like substance that separates the epithelium of the Cnidaria from its inner workings here. The inner workings here are the gastrodermis, which is the part of the GI tract, again, of both the polyp and the medusa over on this side and the polyp form on this side. And then there's a large GI cavity, again present in both forms, where the material, food and so forth, is taken in and absorbed into the Cnidaria. Now, in the tentacles on both forms are something called nematocysts. Nematocysts are small capsule-like objects that contain a toxin, and when a predator or a prey runs into this tentacle, this toxin is then injected into the other animal, and in many cases it's paralyzing, and frequently this ends up causing the death of the animal, and then the Cnidaria eats it. This just shows the life cycle, and as I said, there is a alternation of generations with Cnidaria. One time you have the polyp form, then you have the medusa form, then you have the polyp form. And the polyp can bud and form a medusa. The medusa then has a larvae called a planula, and then forms a polyp. The hydra, which is mentioned in your book, is the small Cnidaria, and one of its interesting aspects is that it moves by somersaulting. And you can look this up on YouTube or look it up on Google. And the creature literally somersaults along to move along. Corals are made of small polyps. These small polyps make a stone-like structure that builds up and makes what's known as coral. And if these polyp Cnidaria are destroyed, then the coral, as it says, is at risk. As I said, the planula here is a zygote, which, if you'll remember, is the union of an egg and a sperm. It comes from the medusa form and makes a polyp form. The Cnidaria is a simple creature, but it is extremely dangerous. You have to watch out for it when you're in the ocean, and you have to be very careful of how you deal with it, even though it's very simple. And you'll remember that one of our examples of getting along was the clownfish and the sea anemone. Well, a sea anemone is a budding polyp form, and the sea anemone, the clownfish, hides in the tentacles of the sea anemone. But this is just a Cnidaria that the clownfish is immune to its stings.